So, welcome back, and I have a special treat for you today that is outside of what is on the agenda, which is the Vajrasattva purification, which we will do. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about how to pronounce some of the terms, the Tibetan and Sanskrit terminology. And so I've put together a little bit of a handout here that I will share with you to help you get an idea of how some of these words are pronounced. It's not going to be 100% accurate, as we'll see. Even the examples I used, there are exceptions, and so there will be certainly any number of exceptions in how you pronounce some of these things. But I wanted to go over this, and hopefully it will be at least somewhat helpful to you in trying to pronounce these things. So the first part is that it's important to be aware that the Tibetan language is not based on letters the way ours is, it's based on syllables. Okay, so you need to pay attention to the syllables. And so when we see a script like a sadhana, for example, it's very common that you will have the Tibetan script followed underneath by a transliteration, which is a way of putting it into English letters, Arabic letters technically, but transcribing that into a way that is more or less pronounceable from our perspective, and then an English translation of what that actually means in the English language. But there are a variety of dialects in the Tibetan language, and so not everybody pronounces the same syllable the same way, or the same words the same way. And there are also variations in terms of the way Tibetans pronounce Sanskrit words in some cases, so they don't always follow the Sanskrit either. So we'll see some examples of that as we get into this. Another problem is that there is no standard way of translating the sounds into English script, and so you'll see different ways of writing things out, and so that creates another problem in terms of how do you pronounce some of these. So some are more phonetic than others are. And then there's also nuances in the way that the Tibetans pronounce things, and so that can also be a little bit of a challenge for us as we go about trying to do these things. So the first thing I want to focus on is the fact that everything is in the form of syllables. If you look at things for the syllables, that really helps in understanding how to pronounce them. And so, for example, I've put the first part here of the Vajrasattva mantra as it might be transliterated. So we have Om Benza Sato Samaya Manu Palaya Benza Sato Tenopa Tishtadrido Me Bawa. Okay? And then right below that, I have indicated where the syllable breaks are. Now, most syllables in Tibetan end with a vowel. So that makes it much easier to see where the syllable breaks are. But you'll notice as you go through here, there's a couple of places where that's not true. So we have Om, and then here we have a first one, Ben, B-E-N, doesn't end with the E, but it ends with, so usually if there's two consonants, you would break in between them. But sometimes you'll have three consonants and other factors that come in, and we'll look at a couple of those just briefly. But you can see the Ben, and then the break, the Za, and then Sa, To, Sa, Ma, Ya, Ma, Nu, Pa, La, Ya, Ben, Ta, Sa, To, Te, No, Pa, Tish. Another one where we have there three syllables together. So the Tish goes together. Ta, Dri, Do, Me, Ba, Wa. So if you can look at the breaks, the syllable breaks, it makes it much easier then to figure out how most likely to pronounce the things. There are some cases, and I'll show you a couple of them, where when the things get run together, it actually changes the sound a little bit. So we have the syllables, and then the next thing that's important to be aware of are the vowels. And in Tibetan, there are 5 vowels. We have the equivalent of our A, E, I, O, U. as the vowels. The way they're pronounced in Tibetan is in the second column. So the A is pronounced A, E is pronounced A. Notice they don't match up here. The long A. The I, the English I, is pronounced E, like a long E. The O is pronounced O. Here's one that matches. And then the U is pronounced more like U, like in moon. Okay?
Is that also long?
No, U is not long. Okay, it's like two O's with a short little smiley face on top. Okay, so those are the basic way that you pronounce the 5 vowels in Tibetan. So A, E, O, U are the vowels. So then I've given you a couple of examples of each one, the actual word, as well as how it would be pronounced, or at least an approximation to that. So the first one is Dewa. So you can see the E is pronounced like an A, and the A is pronounced like an A. So we have Dewa. Now, Lama is an exception because we say not Lama, but Lama. So it gets pronounced slightly differently. And then we have Gate. So A for the A and Te and A for the E. Okay? Gate. 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 And then we have Pema. Again, the last one, the E is pronounced slightly different. So Pe on the first part, but Meh on the second part, even though it's the same syllable. And then for the next one, we have Dakini. And again, it's not exactly Dakini, it's more of a Dakini. And then we have Hri, pretty straightforward. And then Totreng. Now here, the E is not pronounced like an A, but when you have the NG after it, it's pronounced more like a short E sound, Treng. It's pronounced pretty much the way it looks. Then we have Om, long O. Guru, pretty much the way that it's spelled there with the U sound. And then Hong, and again, it changes slightly with the NG, the actual pronunciation, but it's very close to how we would pronounce it just looking at it from an English perspective. So those variations can really only be learned through experience. But if you keep in mind the basic sound of those vowels when you're pronouncing things, you'll come pretty close at least. And then you'll catch on to some of the variations as we go through some of those. And then on the back, we look at consonants. Consonants are a little bit more problematic than the vowels are. And so the first one is that basically the consonants are pronounced the way they are in English for the most part, so that's good. But there are some differences. So for example, G is usually pronounced as a hard G, G. Whereas in some cases it can be pronounced as a soft G or a J, J. And so here is a good example of that, Orgian or Orgian. So the usual way would be Oregon, a little bit like the state Oregon, but it's not. But it has the hard G sound, but a lot of people also pronounce it Origin. So either way works. And in the next one, we have a little different case of G. Here we have Dzogchen. Now, the D is silent. You have two consonants together. The D is silent, but you start that by putting the two together, but we'll focus on that in just a moment, and then look at the G itself. Now, you'll actually see this written sometimes as D-O-G-C-H-E-N, and sometimes as D-Z-O-K-H-E-N. And the reason is that it's pronounced halfway between a G and a K. So it's Dzogchen. chin, and it's more like a stop than like a hard G. Like it's not zog chin or zok chin, but it's just a stop, zok chin. And so that's a little bit different. And then we get these mixture of two consonants coming together in ways that in English we don't normally do. So for example, a TS or the DZ that we saw in Dzogchen. And so what happens is that you start off as if you're going to say the first letter, the D, but then you emphasize the second letter. So again, it's a little bit like a stop kind of thing. Well, in this case, it's turned around the other way. It's a start. So you put your tongue like you're going to say D, but instead of saying D, because your tongue is against the roof of your mouth, you say a Z. And a Z, our tongue is not against the mouth, the roof of the mouth. Okay, so but you do it, and so it comes out da, da. Okay, so a little different pronunciation. And TS is basically the same way. When you say T, it goes against the roof of your mouth. T, t. But if you say S, it comes close, but it doesn't actually touch the roof of your mouth. So here again, you start off like you're going to say a T, but then say the S. So. Okay, so here it's so gal. So that's another one that we often see. Another one that happens sometimes is when we get what would be two vowels stuck together in the English script here. So samaye would be the way that we would normally think about that. But what we often see is a samiye kind of sound. Or a samye. Some people almost leave the E out in pronouncing it. So samaye. And so the closer it gets to a samye kind of a sound. And the same with ta-ya-ta. Okay, so here you put in kind of an E sound, ta-ya-ta, ta-ya-ta. And so some people even pronounce it te-ya-ta, okay, which isn't technically correct, but it comes very close to that, or ta-ya-ta. Okay? And then we can also get these kind of dangling consonants at the end of a word. And so we have a couple of examples here, da and sho. So the dangling H or G at the end is not pronounced. So we don't say dog, we just say da. And we don't say shog, we say sho. Okay? So if you have a single consonant just dangling at the end like that, it usually means that it's silent, that you don't actually pronounce it. But it may mean that you kind of come to a stop with that. So da with the G it's not da, it's da. It's a short ah. Okay? Oftentimes too, in the Tibetan language, we will use H in conjunction with a consonant. And that can create problems with the way that we see things in English as well, because when we put a P and an H together, what do we use? F sound, right? Fa. And there is no F sound in the Tibetan language. And so what we have is a soft version of that letter. So with a P, it becomes a P. Instead of P, it's P, soft. Okay? You can just say a hard P sound and you'll be okay. In this case, so it's the word pay. Okay? Pay. But it's a soft pay. The emphasis is on the A sound. And or there's other words. You'll see a BHA, for example, in Bhagavan. So it's a BH is a soft B, if you will. But the main thing is don't try to pronounce the H. Just kind of skip over that. And then another one is a V sound. In Sanskrit, they actually pronounce the V sound. But in Tibetan, they didn't have a V, and so they insert a W. And so, for example, here we have sarva, which is pronounced that way in Sanskrit, and so it's okay to actually say it that way in a mantra, for example, because they're usually written in Sanskrit. Or you'll hear Tibetans say sarwa. Today we're talking about vajrasattva, 2 V's, and they will say vajrasattva, 2 W's, in doing that, because they don't normally pronounce the V. And so that's an example. With vajrasattva, there's also the fact that they often then turn it around and use a Tibetan version rather than the Sanskrit. And so in the example here we have vajrasattva as vajrasattva or benzasattva, or completely going the other way, benzasato. And that's actually the way it's most commonly pronounced in the Vajrasattva mantra, is benzasato. Okay? And so the transliterations often have that version in there. Another one is Padma. Okay? So it's pa-ma, but it's pronounced pe-me. Pe-me. And Hri is pronounced either Hri, the way it looks, or because of a linguistic variation, some people pronounce it Shri. Okay, they add an S in front. So either of those is okay. It's just that you'll see these variations. In fact, in a few cases, you'll actually see it written with the S included as a Shri. So these are just a few of the common kinds of examples that you'll see in terms of the vowels, and a few exceptions with those, the consonants and a few exceptions with those. But if you can memorize these few exceptions, you'll actually be able to come pretty close with most of the pronunciations that we see in doing the mantras and a few other lines that you'll see actually transliterated in the Tibetan or Sanskrit. So hopefully you'll find that a little bit helpful.